Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Welcome, everyone, to the G-Note Podcast. I am your host, Jason Spicy G. Goldman, and I'm a Grammy-winning record producer, arranger, and musician. I've been a music professor at University of Southern California for over 22 years, and I am most known for writing and producing music for the iconic jazz crooner Michael Bublé over the past 20 years. This is a podcast for musicians who want advice and strategies on navigating the music industry. If you're not a musician but a music fan, I promise there is plenty in here for you as well. On this pod, we talk all things music. On today's pod, we are talking about a day in the life of a jazz musician. Let's go. What's happening, everyone? Welcome back. Thanks, as always, for lending me your ears. Today, I'm really excited to discuss the topic, a day in the life of a jazz musician. Most people do not know what jazz musicians do. I mean, I should clarify. They know we play music, but not on the day-to-day and the incredible amount of work that we do. So I want to break that down today, and hopefully you'll get a glimpse of what the average jazz musician's day, and more importantly, career, is like. And for those of you who have kids that want to go to college to major in jazz and you're very nervous about that because you don't really know what a jazz musician's life is like, you just know the stereotypes, hopefully this will shed some light and you'll understand a little bit about where they're at and where their headspace is. On a quick note, I did an episode called What is Jazz?, in which I discuss what jazz actually is. It's a real fun episode, and I recommend it for those of you who are not quite sure about this magical art form. It's a really interesting episode, and it's, of course, charged as some of the episodes are, and debatable. But I feel you should check it out if you get a chance. So that's the one I think it's called What is Jazz? The classic stereotype of a jazz musician is being in some dark, smoky club, talking in some secret language, using words like cat and vibe and hip, and being high all of the time. Well, some of that is actually true. We do have our own slang and our own kind of vernacular, but this is not the 50s or 60s anymore, and there's not heroin running rampant in the jazz community. So first, jazz is arguably the most difficult genre of music to learn. Now, I know I may get some heat for that, but I'm going to explain why I feel that way. For example, in classical music, the vast majority of the focus is on virtuosic ability, right? Trying to master an instrument and play it at the highest level possible, which is certainly very, very challenging to say the least. In pop music, for example, the goal is to get maybe the best groove or best pocket or write the best song or, which is also challenging and difficult. However, in jazz, we attempt to do all of those things that I just mentioned, plus we have a ton more that we have to and are required to learn and know. Jazz requires an intense knowledge of advanced harmony. And while it is true that some artists in jazz have raw talent and can just hear the advanced harmony, I mean, it's incredible. I've seen people who just can play, as we could see in rock music too. Like some people can just play great guitar solos, but have no idea how to read music or know what they're playing most of the time. They just know the sounds because it's just pure raw talent. But the vast majority of us have to practice, or as we jazz musicians say, we got to shed a ton. So once we learn this knowledge, we then have to apply that to our improvisation and compositions. Here is the challenging part about being a jazz musician. The jazz musician is asked to improvise using the knowledge he or she has and create new and interesting things every single time we play. So as an example, the typical small jazz group consists of like piano, bass, drums, and maybe a horn or two. And what we do is we play the melody to like a song, like if we're going to play a song from memory. And side note here, typically an average jazz musician knows roughly around 200 to 300 songs. These are typically songs comprised mostly of the American Songbook, right? And we've mentioned this on some of the earlier pods, which is like Broadway shows from like 40s and 50s and 60s, and even earlier, actually. Songs like Autumn Leaves, All of Me, The Way You Look Tonight, things you've heard before. As well as these American Songbook tunes, we also learn some jazz tunes that have become what we call standards. So if someone says, let's play a standard, they're referring to one of those American Songbook songs or a jazz tune. And we learn these songs so that we can play with people from anywhere all over the world. This way, we can literally walk up on a bandstand or stage and call one of these standards, and away we go without even knowing or ever having played with the other musicians in the band. We'll be able to play a song with them. So once we've learned those tunes, the next level then is to communicate with the band that you're actually playing with via these musical ideas. So again, remember, we're going to play the melody of the song with the band, and then we are going to improvise. So in order to do that, we have to be able to navigate the harmonic progressions, while we're improvising through the harmony, while collaborating with the band as the entire band is offering ideas. And this is just the performance aspect of what we're doing. One of the most complex things that we do, like I just mentioned, is navigating these harmonic progressions. And some of them, especially in jazz music, can be very complicated or heavy. And we spend a lot of our early time when we're learning jazz in the practice room, learning standard jazz vocabulary and learning. So it's basically like learning another language, and then learning how to utilize those tools in that language to create our own ideas and basically an on-the-spot composition. This is why I'm saying it's probably one of the most challenging art forms out of all the musical art forms, because we have to still be able to play our instrument at a very high level. So we're still doing something similar to the classical musicians. We also have to make sure our pocket or our groove, like a deep groove, is really, really good. And then on top of that, we're trying to navigate this harmony and listen to the other parts of the band. And what we're going to do is, while the form of the song is going. So if you're not sure, like, well, what does the word form mean? If you've ever heard like a blues, a 12-bar blues, right? At the end of that 12 bars, we go back and do that again. And we do the 12 bars over and over and over again. And when a jazz musician solos on it, we solo over the chords of the blues just without, I'm just saying the blues in this particular instance, without the melody happening, right? Because in place of the melody, we're doing our improvisation. So we play and improvise for the first 12 bars, and then we go back and do it again, and the form continues to go. So as jazz musicians, we're keeping the form in our head, we're keeping the harmony in our head and in our ears, and we're listening to the musicians around us because that's informing us, or that's giving us information, and we can play a solo, and we should be playing solos based on the information that's given and the collaborative nature of the music, which is why this is so challenging to do. I've said this before on an earlier pod episode. You know, when people ask me, like, why should I go to, school for jazz? And to me, that's the easiest out of all the musical things to go to school for. Jazz is the easiest one for me to be like, yeah, you should go to school for jazz. If you want to be a musician, you should really be a jazz musician because you have to learn everything else aside from just jazz as well. So you're kind of learning everything. So you'll be at the highest possible, or you're heading towards the highest possible level of the art form. And one of the great aspects of being a jazz musician is that unlike other musicians, we can play a lot of gigs in various genres, right? So, if we're playing, a pop person calls us up and is like, hey, I have a gig, I need a horn player for this pop group. Can you come play? The answer is yes. Why? Because we can play pop music. We can read music typically, and we can improvise over it. If a musician from a different genre calls us up and asks us to play, the answer is yes. 90 to probably 99% of the time. Of course, classical's a little bit different because they specifically have their things that they work on, and you need to be pretty much a virtuosic musician, especially if you're going for like an orchestra, like a major orchestra or something. But this allows the jazz musician to work a lot. To be clear, while this does not make us a master of all the genres, because of the level of harmony knowledge jazz musicians typically have, we are able to hop into most bands and function quite well. Again, because we are working on hearing harmony, and a lot of our practice time is spent transcribing other jazz musicians, the typical jazz musician at the pro level can pretty much figure out the harmony to the average song without ever playing or hearing it within one listen of the form. Not only that, check this out. If you just sing, like if it's like a basic melody, if you were to sing us a basic melody, we could probably tell you what the harmony is likely to be without ever hearing anything except you singing the melody to us. That's the level of a jazz musician, and that's what we're able to do a lot of the time. A jazz musician's career is a bit complicated in that we have to do so many things to make a decent salary. And that's probably like that for the vast majority of musicians. That's not just a jazz musician thing. But again, one of the reasons that we become jazz musicians is because it's a little bit easier for us to do a multitude of things as opposed to some of the other musicians that I mentioned. Jazz musicians typically, as part of their, livelihood and living, we teach. And, typically we start by teaching private lessons and building up what's called a studio, just a bunch of different private lessons. We could teach at colleges, middle schools, wherever, high schools, college. Aside from performing, we also write a ton. And we are basically, even nowadays, asked to be basic engineers, right? Because people will call me and be like, hey, can you lay down this sax part for me and just send me the track? So in my own studio, I will record my saxophone and then send it to them. So I have to now, be a basic engineer. And then, of course, jazz musicians, a lot of the biggest record producers of all time, or people that are super influential, happen to have been jazz musicians. The great Quincy Jones. Think Michael Jackson, right? He produced Michael Jackson's Off the Wall and Thriller. jazz musician. The greatest jazz, film composer of all time, John Williams, jazz musician. I can name you tons of musicians. Jeff Basker, who produced the band Fun, and Mark Ronson's Uptown Funk, jazz musician. I went to school with him. J.R. Rodham, who founded Jason Derulo and Ayaz and Sean Kingston, and did a lot with Britney Spears, etc. The list goes on and on. Jazz musician. There are the top of the top. Typically, tend to have been or are jazz musicians for the reasons that I mentioned before, because we're required to learn so much about music and the functions of harmony and how to create it. Finally, just so everyone is aware, the typical jazz musician is practicing roughly 2 to 3 hours a day minimum. Now, that tends to be obviously, earlier in the jazz musician's career, particularly when they're in college. But I'm sure some of you have heard there are jazz musicians that practice 4 to 8 hours a day. People like John Coltrane, he was known for just practicing almost around the clock. It's almost like an obsession. Jazz musicians also write a ton of music. We take our knowledge of harmony and all the things we've been working on and write it down and write music. The great jazz trumpeter Terrence Blanchard told me, in order to get your playing better, write more. And in order to get your writing better, play more. Folks, that's all the time we have for today. I hope you got a little bit more of an understanding as to what the jazz musician's life is like and what we do. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this pod so you can stay up to date with new shows, giveaways, and more importantly, concerts. I say it all the time. My big band is playing at Vibrato Jazz Club, usually every 3 to 4 months, and we have a show coming up in December that you should come to. Go check out their website, Vibrato Jazz, or you can go to my website, which is jasongoldmanmusic.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at SpicyGmusic, and you can see what I'm currently working on, when my next shows will be, or if you just want to say hi. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Much love. Peace.